What happens when you give everything? You have to save the people who should love you most, and they repay you with silence. Have you ever been so exhausted that you forgot what your own life felt like? Drop a comment below telling me where you are watching from. And if you love shocking family, revenge stories hit like, and subscribe to Mortal Revenge. Trust me, you do not want to miss what happens next. My name is Olivia. I grew up in a small house that smelled like lentil soup and old books. My parents worked hard. They taught me to be honest and to always help family. I learned early that family was the place you could always go back to. When my siblings left for college, my parents believed that the worst was behind us. They thought the debts would be manageable with steady pay and good luck. Then the mistakes began. My father started to borrow money for things that he could not afford. He called them investments. He said he would pay them back. My mother believed him because she loved him. My older brother joined in. He thought he could fix it with a business plan. My younger sister pretended not to notice. I watched the numbers grow on the bank statements. I watched the letters from the lenders pile up in the hallway. At first I felt helpless. Then I felt responsible. I found work at a small cafe. I took every extra shift I could. Then I found an evening job cleaning offices. Then I started a third gig delivering groceries on weekends. I worked in daylight and in night. I learned to live on very little sleep. I learned to eat only what was necessary. I watched my family sleep peacefully while I calculated expenses. I told myself this was temporary. I told myself that if I held on long enough, everything would be okay. The house felt smaller as the debts grew. The laughter in the living room sounded forced. My parents smiled at me with tired eyes. My brother bragged about plans that never materialized. My sister posted pictures of nights out. Inside, I carried the weight of every bill like a heavy stone. I told myself that I was doing the right thing. I believed that at some moment they would look at me and say thank you. I waited for that moment like a tired child waiting for a parent to come home. Work became my life. I woke before dawn to brew coffee for strangers. I rushed to the office cleaning job and moved like a machine. I delivered groceries at night, and I counted the money in my pocket with numb fingers. My hands were sore. My feet were sore. My mind felt like a fog. I missed birthdays and school recitals. I missed quiet afternoons when I could have read a book. I missed the ability to be young and careless for a little while. People at work called me dedicated. My manager at the cafe said I was an inspiration. I did not tell anyone that I had stopped crying. I did not tell anyone that the tears fell when I was alone in my car at 3 a.m. I kept my exhaustion like a secret badge of honor. I kept paying bills. Mortgage payments were made on time. Credit card debts were reduced month by month. The lenders called less often. The house did not feel at risk any longer. I paid more than I earned. I gave up little luxuries, and I stopped seeing friends. I said no to weddings and parties. I stitched my life into a tight, quiet seam so that the fabric would not tear. When my mother asked why I was so tired, I smiled and blamed the long hours. When my father thanked me for being responsible, I nodded and did not mention the nights. I stayed awake planning how to cut costs. I wanted them to be proud. Years passed like this. The debts shrank. The pressure faded. The lenders stopped leaving messages at night. For a little while, I let myself imagine a life where the bills were mine to relax about. I imagined a small holiday for us all. I dreamed of a day when my family would come and sit at a table and say thank you with soft, sincere voices. That memory kept me going. The gratitude never came. The change in our finances did not change their behavior. My brother started a habit of borrowing again. He believed that because I had fixed the old problems, I would fix anything new. My mother became lazy about money. She spent more on little pleasures and told herself she deserved it after all she had been through. My father started keeping secrets again. He would say he had paid a bill and then hide the receipt. I remember a night when I came home with a small cake from the bakery that I had wanted to share. I worked 12 hours that day, and the cake was small and humble. They sat and laughed at their phones. My brother chewed with his mouth open. My sister rolled her eyes at a television show. No one noticed the cake until I offered. My mother waved it away and said she was not hungry. They all went back to their screens. I kept silent. I had paid off the debts. I had kept the roof. But their eyes looked past me. They did not see my hands that ached. They did not see the dark circles under my eyes. They did not ask how I was. They took my help like water from a tap. They expected it to flow without thought. I felt the sting of that entitlement like a cold wind. At family dinners, they spoke of their plans to travel on a whim. They talked about expensive meals and purchases that they could now afford. They spoke with certainty about things that were no longer dangerous. Sometimes I laughed with them to keep the peace. Sometimes I walked away and sat on the stairs and let the ache swell inside me. I told myself to be patient. I told myself that one day they would notice. The breaking point came on a Tuesday night. I had worked 2 jobs that day, and I was on my way to the third. I found the door locked. My key did not turn. I pushed, and it did not budge. My brother and sister sat on the living room couch looking at a new television that I had not seen before. My mother sat with a steaming cup of tea, and she was smiling. My brother laughed and said something that made my stomach drop. They were discussing a trip they were planning for the weekend. They were planning to go to a hotel and to eat at restaurants I had never been able to afford. They were imagining the photographs they would take. They were using my sacrifices as a foundation for their luxury. This is what broke me. I felt something tear on the inside. I felt the years of long nights roll into one moment of bright, hot pain. I had given up my days so they could have theirs. I had crawled through exhaustion and humiliation, and now they treated my sweat like a silent machine that would always work. I looked at them and I felt invisible. I could not keep my calm. I shouted for a moment that sounded more like a whisper. I told them that I had paid off the debts that had made our lives small. I told them that I had worked 3 jobs for years. For a heartbeat, there was silence. Then my brother scoffed. My mother said in a small voice that I should be proud that I kept the family together. My sister rolled her eyes. None of them said thank you. I left that night and I did not return. I sat in my car and I let the engine warm. I thought of all the small moments where their indifference had cut me. I thought of how many times I had swallowed hurt to keep the peace. For the first time in years, I did not feel proud of my sacrifice. I felt cheated and used. I cried in the dark, and I made a promise in a voice that was steady and cold. I promised myself that I would stop being invisible. I did not make a scene. I did not shout again. Instead, I began to plan. I had been careful with every payment I made. I had kept records. I had saved. I had done everything possible to build something that could be mine in the quiet. I opened a new account under my name. I bought a small parcel of land under my name in a nearby town. I signed papers for a small rental property that I paid for with a combination of saved tips and the extra hours I had worked. I studied legal ownership. I learned how property law worked. I found a lawyer who listened and who did not judge me for being young and exhausted. I told the lawyer that I wanted to secure my future. I told her that I wanted to protect myself from a family that took without asking. She drew up documents. I signed each one with shaky hands and then with a steady heart. At the same time, I kept doing the jobs. I kept the old routine. In public, I was the same person who paid bills and kept the house. Behind closed doors, I stored receipts and I filed away details. I updated important documents and I transferred ownership where it would matter. I found small ways to reclaim power. I closed a credit card that had been opened in my name without my permission. I changed the beneficiary on an account that had been misdirected. Each legal step felt like taking a breath. Each paper signed was a small victory. I did not tell anyone. When they asked why I was tired, I said I was fine. When they asked why I seemed distant, I said I had a lot on my mind. I wanted to see one day their faces. When they realized that what they had been leaning on was not a bottomless well, I wanted them to see that my labor had been giving them safety while I built my own life in secret. I invited them to dinner on a Sunday. It was not a random invite. I wanted them in one place. I wanted to see them in their best light before I revealed what I had done. I cooked for them from a recipe I had learned from my mother. The table looked ordinary. The conversation was easy at first. They spoke about friends and about plans. At some point, my brother reached for the salt and knocked over a glass. He laughed and joked about his clumsy hands. My mother smiled in that tired way that makes you ache. My sister rolled her eyes at a television show that she had streamed and then put the phone down. There was a comfortable rhythm to the room that used to be my comfort. I felt the rhythm and kept my words careful. I told them that I had news. I wanted to tell them that the debt had been cleared years ago. I wanted to watch the relief wash over them. I wanted to hear a heartfelt thank you. Instead, I watched them look at me with small admiration and then move on. I felt my chest tighten. I told them that I had new responsibilities of my own now and that moving forward, I would be thinking first of my family, meaning myself. My brother made a joke. My mother looked at me like I was being dramatic. The air tightened and then loosened. It was then that I realized something different had to happen. I realized that a conversation would not be enough. I needed to create a real and undeniable consequence to their behavior. I needed them to feel what it was like to lose the certainty that someone else will always clean up their mess. I did not want revenge for the sake of cruelty. I wanted them to learn respect. The next week, I called a meeting, and I sent a formal-looking letter in an envelope with my name on it. I asked them to come to the house at 6 in the evening. I did not explain why. My brother raised his eyebrows. My mother questioned whether there was a reason for fuss. My sister complained that she had plans. They all came eventually because they believed family. Matters were always worth a pause. When they arrived, I sat them at the dining table. I placed a stack of documents in the center. No one touched them. I told them calmly that over the last years, I had done what I could to pay off their debts. I explained that I had done this quietly, without asking for anything in return. I said that I expected nothing beyond gratitude. I paused and held their eyes one by one. My brother smirked and made a remark about dramatics. My mother folded her hands and tried to smooth the tension with a laugh. My sister rolled her eyes and pretended to scroll her phone. I watched each of them, and I let the silence stretch like a taut string. Then I began to speak about the legal steps I had taken to protect myself. I told them that I had purchased property in my name. I told them that I had formalized the transfer of certain assets that I had paid for. I told them that some small accounts had my name listed as the owner. I told them that some of the money they had assumed would always be there was now legally and clearly mine. I said these words simply and without malice. Their faces changed like weather. My brother looked like someone who had swallowed cold water. My mother stared down at her hands. My sister dropped her phone on her lap. For a moment, there was only breathing. Then my brother exploded into anger. He accused me of betrayal. He said that family was supposed to share everything and that I had acted like I owned them. My mother shouted that I had no right to make such choices without consulting them. I listened. I let them have their words. They accused me of cruelty. They accused me of turning my back. My brother threatened. My mother cried. My sister begged to be included. The house filled with noise. I kept my voice low and steady. I reminded them of the nights I had sacrificed. I reminded them of the letters that used to arrive. I reminded them of how close we had been to losing the roof over our heads. When my brother called me selfish, I told him that selfishness would have been to let them continue to sink. When my mother said I had no sense of duty, I said that real duty had no benefit if it was only taken for granted. My words did not silence them, but they cut through the comfortable story they had told themselves for years. They had believed that someone would always be there to save them. I then did something I had prepared for months. I handed them a document that showed the title to the rental property I had purchased. I handed them receipts that proved the mortgage payments I had made. I handed them bank statements that showed where the payments had come from. I handed them emails from lawyers confirming the legal status. I watched while their world tilted. My brother read the papers and his hands shook. He kept reading, and then he looked at me like he had never seen me before. My mother covered her mouth and she began to cry. My sister looked away and then at me with a softness that felt like late rain. For the first time in years, my actions were visible and undeniable. My brother demanded to know why I had not told them. I told him that if I had told them, I would have been asked to do more, and I would have been drained until there was nothing left. I told them that I had done it to protect us all and to finally protect myself. I told them that I had been tired of being the invisible giver. They looked at me and then at each other. There was a shift that night. The entitlement in their faces faded. A new emotion settled in its place. It was a mixture of shame and fear. They had taken my sacrifices for granted, and now they had to live with the knowledge that those sacrifices belonged to me. The balance in the house changed. The rules were rewritten. The days after the revelation were messy and honest. My brother refused to apologize. He went out more often. He started to look for ways to get back what he believed he had a right to. My mother sulked, and then she began to talk to me in a different way. She asked questions about my plans, and she listened to my answers. My sister cried, and then she told me she had been ashamed of her behavior. She promised to change. Some nights my brother would come back late and complain about the little inconveniences that my new decisions caused. He would grumble about having to contribute more. He would ask for my help and then forget to say thank you. I looked at him and I saw a man who had been coddled into believing the world owed him kindness. He did not understand the work it takes to keep a life from falling apart. I had a choice then. I could keep pushing the point until they were broken, or I could allow them to feel the consequences and learn. I chose the latter. I made it clear that I would not be their bank. I made it clear that I would not be their emotional mattress for their bad choices. I hired a manager for the rental property, and I used the income to put aside money for a small apartment and for a modest life where I belong to myself. My mother began to call me more often. At first, the calls were small. She asked about the house and the groceries. Then the calls became more honest. She apologized for laughing at my small cake. She said she had been afraid of facing the truth and easier to pretend that everything could be put back on someone else. She asked me to forgive her. I listened, and I told her that forgiveness was possible, but trust would take time. I moved into my small apartment with cardboard boxes and with an old lamp that lit the corner of my new dining table. The apartment smelled like paint and new beginnings. I kept the rental property. I kept the land that I had bought. I paid myself a salary. I allowed myself to sleep without waking to check the time. I learned to cook without thinking of how many meals I needed to stretch. I learned to walk in the park without mentally scheduling every second. I also learned that justice is not loud. It is not fireworks and dramatic moments. Justice is quiet. Justice is the ability to stand up and say, "This is mine." It is the ability to stop giving when the giving is used as a weapon. My brother called less. He texted about small things. My mother visited and cried on my couch, and then we made a plan for therapy. My sister came by with apologies and a small plant for my window. They changed, slowly and in their own time. My brother stopped expecting my labor and started to look for work. My mother took a job at a local shop and learned to manage a budget. My sister enrolled in a course and started to volunteer. None of these things were because of my threats. They were because the safety net was no longer endless. They had to reach. I found love for myself again. I found a new rhythm that was mine alone. I took a weekend trip, and I paid for it without guilt. I laughed with friends. I cried when I needed to cry. I sat on my apartment floor, and I read a book for pleasure. I realized that my sacrifice had not been wasted. It had bought a life where I could choose who I wanted to be. I learned that giving until you are empty is not noble. It is a recipe for being taken for granted. I learned that compassion must be paired with boundaries. I learned that family is not a license to use others. In the end, I gave because I loved, but I also learned to protect myself. I paid off the debt that nearly swallowed us. I paid a higher cost by learning to say no. If you sacrifice for someone who never says thank you, remember this. Your life matters. Your health matters. Your dignity matters. There is strength in building a future for yourself. You can be kind and still set limits. You can be patient and still create consequences. And most importantly, truth stands on its own. When truth is clear, people start to see what they ignored. If this story shocked you, share your thoughts in the comments below. Like this video if you believe karma always finds a way. Subscribe to Mortal Revenge and hit the bell so you never miss the final twist.